Welcome everyone to this webinar of the Linguistic Society of America. Today we have the next installment in our monthly webinar series in which we feature presenters and topics of interest to our membership and to the broader linguistic community. Today we are pleased to welcome Suha Kudsia, Mary Pastor, Jacqueline Clements, and Tyler Kendall, who will present their talk, Research Funding for Documenting Endangered Languages at NSF and NEH. In this 90-minute webinar, our panelists will give a presentation for about an hour, after which they will respond to your questions in a Q&A session. You can submit your questions at any time using the control panel on your screen. And so without any further ado, I turn this webinar over to our presenters.
Hello, everyone. Mark, can you please confirm that you see the slides?
We see them. They're not in presenter mode yet, but we see them.
Oh, not yet. Okay. And show. I'm gonna do that again. How about now?
Just go up to where it says display settings as we.
Oh, yes. I forgot about that. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much for your help, Mark. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the LSA's presentation. My colleagues and I welcome you, and we are excited to talk to you about research funding for documenting endangered languages at the National Science Foundation, NSF, and the National Endowment for the Humanities, NEH. We are happy to answer your questions at any time during the presentation and at the end during the Q&A period. The four of us will introduce ourselves first. My name is Suha Kudsia. I'm a program officer in the Division of Research at the NEH and the team lead for the DLI-DEL fellowships to document endangered languages. Mary, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, Mary Pastor. I'm a rotating program director at NSF for the linguistics and the DLI-DEL programs. I'm a phonologist. I work on African languages. I've also worked with some language reclamation projects with some Native American tribes, and my home institution is Pomona College in Claremont, California.
Tyler?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Tyler Kendall. It's nice to be with you today. So I'm also a rotating program director, and I'll just say sort of maybe half or so of the program directors at NSF are so-called rotators. So we come in from our sort of usual academic lives for a few years. So I'm actually nearing the end of my rotation. But I've been serving for the last few years as a program director for linguistics, DLI-DEL, and also a program called Human Networks and Data Science, all in the Division of Behavioral and Cognitive Sciences at NSF. In my sort of normal or sort of old life, I'm a faculty member at the University of Oregon in the linguistics department, and I'm a sociolinguist by background.
Jacqueline?
Thanks, Suha. Hi, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Clements, and I'm a senior program officer at the National Endowment for the Humanities. I am the program coordinator for documenting endangered languages with our NSF colleagues, the senior research grants, and I work out of the Division of Preservation and Access, which is interested in funding projects having to do with preserving and accessing the humanities writ large, but including endangered languages. So thank you.
Thanks a lot. And our meeting agenda today, sorry, I think I switched the screen. Okay. Today we will share information about the DLI-DEL fellowships and senior research grants to document endangered languages. We will also talk briefly about the fellowships, about other fellowships and institutional grants offered by NEH and NSF that might be of interest to you. In addition, we will suggest a few tips about organizing and assembling your applications. And in the second half of the meeting, we will have the Q&A period.
Suha, I think you're not sharing the slides anymore. At least I don't see them. Do others see them?
No, they disappeared. There you go,
okay.
Suha.
Can you still see them? Sorry, let's see.
There you go.
Can you see them?
Yes.
Okay. I apologize. I must have hit. Okay, I'm going to remove my keyboard. Okay. So, so a brief introduction about the program, the DLI-DEL program. The Dynamic Language Infrastructure Grants, DLI for short, are run in partnership between NEH and NSF. This long-standing partnership started in 2006 to 2005, many years ago, and it grew out of the two agencies' shared concern for the looming extinction of thousands of languages across the globe, and in particular, threatened indigenous languages in the United States. At the NEH, two divisions manage the DLI applications in collaboration with NSF. The first division is Preservation and Access, which manages the DLI senior grants. And Jacqueline will go over, and Jacqueline is the team lead for those grants. The second, can you still see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. The second division is research, which oversees the DLI fellowship grants. Also at NSF, the DLI-DEL program is located within the Behavioral and the Cognitive Sciences Division of the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate. So to start, what is actually an endangered language? In order to assess the degree of endangerment for the language you are researching, here are some suggestions. Please check the published published endangerment scales or language vitality scales, or use the parameters that appear in at least in the 3 links below. The first source you can check is the UNESCO webpage. Then there is also the Linguistic Society's webpage. It's very helpful. And finally, there is the JSTOR document that you can check to help you assess the significance and the degree of endangerment of the language you are studying. So here is the is the kind of details I'll share with you about the fellowship program. We will start first discussing the fellowship program, and then Mary will go over the senior research grants with you. So I'm going to talk about the program goals, share a few details, and talk about the required and conditional application materials, review criteria, and go over some of the web pages and the important documents that will help you actually with preparing your application. Throughout this presentation, please feel free to submit your questions at any time. The DLI fellowships are individual grants. They are not offered to institutions, unlike the senior research grant. The fellowships are made to individual scholars who may or may not be affiliated with an academic institute. The fellowships are open to adjuncts and non-affiliated scholars, including retired scholars and unaffiliated independent scholars. You don't need a PhD to apply. However, your experience and training should be comparable to having a PhD degree. The grants support projects that will lead to archival documentation and/or publishing scholarly articles, books, book chapters, dictionaries, digital material, grammar books, other scholarly resources, and translations. The deadline to apply for this year is September 14th for awards that begin in May 2023. And the amount of funding is $5,000 per month. Let's take a look at the NEH's webpage for this program. And actually all the, if you're interested in other fellowships and programs offered by the NEH, the layout of all those programs are very similar. So at the top, you'll have the introduction, the title of the grant, followed by a brief summary of the kind of programs or research it supports. And then the important details will be on the left side. You'll have the grant snapshot, what kind of grants they are or fellowships they are, what kind of research they support, the expected outcome or outcomes, and also the deadlines. For the DLI-DEL fellowships, NEH handles the intake and review process for the fellowships. This means you must apply through the grants.gov portal and not through Fastlane or research.gov, as you might have done for other NSF applications and grants. So the program details here, this slide mirrors what you would have seen on the left hand side. That the grants are made to individuals, not institutions, the duration, the amount of funding per month, and also the important deadlines. One thing I'd like to highlight is that for this grant, we accept submission of drafts before the deadlines, and this is optional. So submitting a draft for feedback, the due date is July 14th, 2022. If you submit a draft, you'll get feedback, but to help you improve the application. But please notice that the feedback is non-binding because none of the staff members can actually predict what the panelists would say or comment on. So again, this is optional, but it is a good opportunity. So take advantage of it, and please feel free to submit your drafts by July 14th. On this slide, if you scroll down actually the web page, the landing page for the fellowships, you'll notice that you'll notice step 1, which includes very important documents, including the notice of funding opportunity for fellowships, or what we call a NOFO, N-O-F-O, at NEH. This is similar to what NSF would call solicitation document. That is to say, the detailed information and instructions about how to apply for this fellowship. Download the PDF document, read it carefully, and keep it at hand as you assemble your application. If you scroll down the page, you'll see program resources. They include the frequently asked questions page and a list of funded DLI projects. Please check those 2 documents as well to give you an idea about the kind of programs and projects NEH and NSF supports and funds for this fellowship. So eligibility, before you start drafting your DLI application, consider if you're eligible to apply. Again, the fellowships are for individual research. So, and there are 3 criteria for eligibility here. The first one is the fellowships are open for US citizens residing anywhere in the world. You can be anywhere in the world. As long as you are a US citizen, you can apply for this grant, for this fellowship. It is also open to non-citizens, non-US citizens who have spent the last 3 consecutive years in the US. So if you've been in the US for during the past 3 years, you can apply for the fellowships. Number 2, for most individual grants, you can be affiliated or unaffiliated. Independent scholars and adjuncts, retired faculty members or retired adjuncts are welcome to apply. 3, PhD candidates can apply, but please pay attention to this important condition. You can apply provided that you have fulfilled all the requirements for your degree, your PhD degree, by the application deadline. However, notice PhD degree is not required to apply. So if you don't have a PhD degree, that's fine, as long as you have comparable experience and training. And you can demonstrate that by highlighting your experience and training in the CV and also in the narrative. But matriculated students are not eligible to apply for NEH grants or fellowships unless they have fulfilled all the requirements for their degrees. Required documents. The application is made up of 5 required attachments. The narrative is the most important. This is where you describe your project and make the case for funding it. The narrative must be succinct and well organized. Keep in mind that it's just 3 pages long. For the work plan, you should describe any preparation of your project and include a detailed plan in 3 months increments, each detailing what you will do and where you'll be spending that time. Will you visit the archives? Will you do field work and so on? Will you be doing interviews and the like? The shortest period of performance is 6 months, and the maximum period of funding is 12 months, full-time in both cases. The amount of funding, as I mentioned earlier, is $5,000 per month. This is why preparing a budget is not required or needed. You'll notice that there's a difference regarding this point when Mary talks about the senior research grants. So for fellowships, you don't need to prepare a budget. Research must be full-time, but fellows can interrupt their work once, often to meet teaching obligations, after an initial minimum period of 3 months. We receive a fair number of proposals by applicants who don't hold a tenure-track position. The option to split the period of performance allows non-affiliated scholars to pursue their research without compromising their teaching contracts. Remember that you must devote 100% of your time to the project during the fellowship when you are receiving fellowship funding. If the entire project cannot be completed in a year, that's okay, but please provide a plan and timeline for completion beyond the fellowship period. The bibliography is limited to a single page, so remember to include just the most pertinent works related to your project. The resume is a 2-page CV that lists current and past positions, your degrees with dates and titles of dissertations, any awards, honors, and grants, especially those that are relevant to your project, as well as publications with full citations. Make sure you list publications and activities that are relevant to your proposed project. A PhD is not required, as I mentioned earlier, but you need to have the skills, experience, and training that will qualify you to carry on with the project and to bring it to fruition. Writing samples are 1 to 2 pages long. Make sure you provide examples that illustrate the methods and the results of your linguistic research. Depending on the type of your project, you will most likely need to submit additional documents like a speaker community document, a data management document, and one reference who can assess your skills and experience and training and comment on the value of the writing samples. Although these documents are considered conditional, i.e. optional, the panelists actually are very impressed if the application has as many conditional material or documents as possible, especially the speaker community support letter, the reference letters, and if applicable, the data management plan, archive support, and other documents. This is a copy of the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity. You'll see this page under Section E, and this slide actually explains the review criteria. You'll notice there are 5 categories that panelists and reviewers need to use or apply to evaluate applications. It makes sense to craft your application so that it covers each of these aspects fully and convincingly. The application guidelines in the NOFO tell you which parts of the proposal address which criterion of the 5 that are listed here. Please note that the criteria can be relevant to more than one section of the application, and taken together, the parts of the proposal, that is to say the narrative, bibliography, work plan, CV, and any of the appendices should form a coherent whole. The first and most important criterion is significance. That is to say the intellectual merit and broader impact of the proposed project, its value to linguistics and humanities scholarship, and the level of endangerment of the language to be studied, or the urgency to document the language that you're studying and researching. These aspects must be addressed in the first part of your application narrative under the part on significance. The second criterion are methods and preparation. It is important to explain the conception and description of the project's research design, including the depth and extent of collaborators, the extent of the collaboration with the speaker communities or community. This part also refers to your work sample, bibliography, and the speaker community support letter. The third criterion covers skills, and you can go over that part or provide details about your skills in the narrative section under competencies and skills, and also in your CV. Number 4, the outcomes and dissemination. Generally speaking, these match up with the final product and the dissemination part of the narrative. They also include the data management plan and archive letter, if applicable. Number 5 is the work plan, and this is directly linked to the work plan attachment. So here again is a summary of the 5 review criteria: significance, methods and preparation, skills, outcomes and dissemination, and then finally the work plan. Funding restrictions. This is found under number 6 in the notice of funding opportunity. Sometimes DLI-DEL fellowships do not fund certain projects because other divisions or agencies can fund them. For example, documentaries, podcasts, and exhibitions are funded through NEH's Public Program Division, but not through this grant opportunity. Inventories and catalogs of collections are funded through NEH's Preservation and Access Division. And if you have any questions about this part, Jacqueline will be happy to answer your questions because she works with that division. Research by students enrolled in a degree program, including research for doctoral dissertations and theses, are not funded here. But Mary will discuss this later on in the additional funding with NSF. So you might have an opportunity to apply for through NSF, but not through NEH if you're an enrolled doctoral student. You'll notice that the preparation or revision of educational materials as writing for children, guidebooks, and self-help books are not funded through the DLI-DEL fellowships. One thing to note, an additional thing to note, is that revitalizing textbooks or material to revitalize an endangered language is not funded here. What is funded is basically the research to document and analyze the endangered language. The review process is quite long, about 7 months long. After the submissions, the deadline is over. The peer review panel, and they are, we invite panelists who specialize in linguistics and linguistic anthropology to review applications. So they are scholars in the field who work in the field. So the panel will be convened by NEH, and they will meet late in that year after the deadline, most likely December or January. Then NEH staff prepares a list of recommendations After consulting with the chair's office, the recommendations are forwarded to the National Council for the Humanities, which is the advisory board that meets 3 times a year. The council reviews the staff's recommendations, and then the chair's office makes the final funding decisions shortly thereafter. Notifications to applicants are then sent out to the applicants. A few tips regarding to help you prepare your application. Start with the review criteria. Keep that in mind, the 5 criteria I mentioned earlier. Demonstrate your project's significance. Provide context, scholarly, institutional, etc., to the significance and the importance of your research. Develop a clear, realistic work plan and make sure that you have enough details about your work plan to convince the panelists about the why you need X number of months to cover to work on your project. Seek advice from colleagues and from NEH as well as NSF. Check and proofread your application, and remember, drafting, writing, and polishing a strong application takes a lot of time, so start early and don't wait until the last minute to submit your application. Finally, I'd like to mention additional grant opportunities at NSF. We have individual fellowships. These fund full-time research for anywhere between 6 to 12 months. And for all of these additional funding opportunities, the amount of funding is $5,000 per month. And all those opportunities are open to independent scholars and non-affiliated scholars, except for the last one, the awards for faculty fellowships. So the summer stipends, applicants don't need to be affiliated. However, if they are affiliated with an institution, applicants need to be nominated by their institution to apply for this program. And the stipends fund full-time research for 2 summer months at the rate of $5,000 per month. Awards for faculty are similar to the fellowships and stipends program. But the applicants need to be affiliated with federally designated institutions. These institutions are HBCUs, Historically Black Colleges and Universities, HSIs, Hispanic Serving Institutions, and TCUs, Tribal Colleges and Universities. Another difference regarding the awards for faculty is that applicants are allowed to pursue their research part-time when they have an award for faculty. They are also allowed to break the period of performance to hold, for example, to hold the award for 6 months, teach for a semester, and then resume their research at the end of that semester. There are restrictions on those types of fellowships. For example, funding cannot be used to write or publish textbooks for curriculum developments, etc., books for children, and guidebooks, as I mentioned earlier. So if you have any questions about those fellowships, I'll be happy to respond to you. And also, if you have any questions about the DLI-DEL fellowship, I'll be happy to help you. And remember to send me, if you want, your draft proposals by July 14th. Thank you so much. And now I'll turn the slides to Mary. Let's see, how do I do that? Stop showing. Let's see.
Stop showing, and then you want to make me the presenter, or maybe I am a presenter already. No, I don't have access.
Change the presenter. Let's see. Mary. Okay.
Okay.
Have I stopped sharing my slides?
I think so. So I think I'm showing my slides now. Does that look right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Great. So thank you, Suha. And whoops. And yeah, I will be talking now about the DLI-DEL research grants on the NSF side. So this is a joint initiative between NSF and NEH, but the review process is managed by NSF. And the research grants support research and infrastructure that digitally records and documents languages with an emphasis on endangered languages through the preparation of lexicons, grammars, text samples, and databases, advancing linguistic theory and the study of language. One note here is that DLI-DEL does not fund language revitalization on its own, but many of our funded projects do include revitalization as part of broader impacts, and we really strongly support and encourage that. So in terms of the logistics of submitting an NSF proposal, you as the researcher are the one who would write the proposal, but it's your institution or organization that submits the proposal. And then once it's submitted, and that would happen through your sponsored research office at your institution. And then once it's been submitted, NSF reviews the proposal. A minimum of 3 reviews is typically required for proposals. And so then it goes through a number of steps that I'm going to talk a little bit more about as we go on. The first step is called compliance check, and that is where NSF staff go through your proposal to make sure that all the required elements are present, and also that you haven't exceeded the page limitations, etc. There sometimes is some back and forth at that stage where you have to submit something additional or a revision to bring your proposal into compliance. After compliance checking is finished, then sometimes we conduct in-house reviews that would be for certain special types of proposals, such as supplements to an award that's already been made. But usually we involve outside reviewers, either ad hoc reviews or advisory panels or both. So ad hoc reviews would be where we send your proposal out to an expert reviewer for review. And advisory panels are where we bring in a collection of experts in a variety of fields relevant to DLI-DEL, who will get together, review the proposals, and rank the proposals twice a year. Did my screen sharing disappear? My screen changed. Okay, thank you. Let's see. My screen just changed suddenly, so sorry about that. Okay, does it still look okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Great. So after the advisory panels, then the program officers will make our recommendations for funding. And that stage, there's a lot that goes on before that happens. There's a lot of paperwork involved. If your proposal gets to the point where we're going to recommend an award, then we will be asking you for a lot of documentation, such as IRB approval, an abstract for your project. We might ask you to revise aspects of your archiving plan. We may ask you, we often ask for budget revisions, etc. So there's a lot that happens at that stage. And then once all that's finalized, then the program officers submit our recommendations for the award, and then it goes up through the levels of kind of higher levels of approval, culminating in the division director review and concurrence. And then after the division director has concurred, that's when an award will be made. One thing to point out here is that grants are awarded to institutions or organizations, not to individuals. So this is a difference from the fellowships that Suha just described. And another note that I wanted to add here is that many of you are probably familiar with submitting proposals in FastLane. You may be aware that FastLane is actually in the process of being decommissioned in favor of research.gov. You can also submit proposals via grants.gov, but we are encouraging people to use research.gov. That's the system that works best with NSF's internal systems. And so for now, FastLane is still available, but it will become unavailable as research.gov rolls out. So wanted to encourage people to start using research.gov if you aren't using it already. In terms of eligibility for the NSF grants, so the types of organizations that are eligible to apply are institutions of higher education in the US, nonprofit or non-academic organizations in the US, and tribal organizations or actual tribes are also eligible. And if you ever have questions about your organization's eligibility, you're welcome to get in touch with us. In terms of the required elements for your proposal, so the main place where, when you're submitting an NSF proposal, you're going to be consulting this document called the PAPPG all the time. PAPPG stands for Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. We like our acronyms, so we call it the PAPPG. And I've given a link to that here on the slide, but you can also just Google that NSF PAPPG and you'll find it. Make sure you're looking at the most recent one. And that gives all the agency-wide requirements for for proposals. So a couple of things to highlight that your proposal needs to include would be a data management plan. And also, if it's relevant, if you have a postdoc in your budget, then you will need a postdoctoral mentoring plan. And then for DLI-DEL proposals, there's some specific requirements. So these proposals also require a statement of consultation with the community that you'll be working with, and also a letter of collaboration from the archive where you'll be storing and sharing your data. Wanted to mention a few things about the NSF merit review process. So as I mentioned earlier, we use ad hoc reviewing. So that's where individual proposals are sent to peer reviewers. For DLI-DEL, these reviewers typically hold a PhD in linguistics or anthropology or a related field, and they have expertise in the specific proposal topic. We also have the DLI-DEL advisory panel that I mentioned, which convenes twice a year and reviews and ranks all the proposals. The proposals are evaluated on intellectual merit, broader impacts, and program-specific criteria that I'll discuss in just a moment. After the advisory panel has met and evaluated the proposals and looked at all the reviews, then the program officers also review the proposals, analyze the reviews and the panel rankings, and then we also consider some other factors in making funding recommendations. This full process often takes 6 months. I think people are sometimes surprised by that. And so I want to make sure it's clear that, that this process really can take 6 months. And so you should kind of budget for that and think about that as you're thinking ahead to what your start date is going to be and what target date you want to aim for when you're planning to submit your proposal. So the review criteria, I wanted to talk a little bit more specifically about those. So there are these 2 main criteria that are applied NSF-wide. So these are not specific to the program, and that is intellectual merit, the potential to advance knowledge, and broader impacts, which are the potential to benefit society and contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes. DLI-DEL also has 4 specific criteria that we apply, and you can find them in the solicitation for the DLI-DEL grants in the link that I've given here on the slide. The first of these is your discussion of the degree of endangerment and urgency of the need for documentation. Then the description of the level, quality, and accessibility of any existing documentation. Discussion of any special linguistic, historical, cognitive, cultural, or social significance of the languages or the language. And a discussion of collaborations and other arrangements made with the speaker community, which could include reference to the training of native speaker linguists or to the production of resources useful to the community of native speakers. I'm going to talk about 4 different types of DLI-DEL proposals here and kind of give you an overview of these types. So the 4 types will be the senior research grant proposals. These are grants for 1 to 3 years for up to $450,000. Then we have the career proposals, which are 5-year grants with a minimum of $400,000 up to around $600,000 for DLI-DEL. Then we have the Doctoral Dissertation Research Improvement or DDRI grant. These are for 1 to 2 years for up to $15,000 in direct costs, not including the indirect costs to your organization. And finally, conference and workshop proposals. So I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about each of these 4 types. So first, we have the DLI-DEL Senior Research Grants. Again, these are for 1 to 3 years for up to $450,000, including indirect costs. We have 2 annual target dates for proposals, September 15th and February 15th. The project description for these grants is 15 pages. And the proposal has to include all the elements required by the NSF PAPPG. That's the large document that I mentioned that you're going to need to consult when you submit your proposal, and also the DLI-DEL solicitation. And so for the details about the requirements for DLI-DEL, you can look at our website. The link is here on the slide, and that also gives you a link to the solicitation, which lays out all the requirements for the proposals specific to this program. The next one I want to talk about is the DLI-DEL Career Awards. So Career is a foundation-wide activity that offers the NSF's most prestigious awards in support of early career faculty who have the potential to serve as an academic role model in research and education and to lead advances in the mission of their department or organization. These awards are for 5 years. Again, they have a minimum of $400,000, and for DLI-DEL, we let them go up to around $600,000 as a max. There's only one NSF-wide annual deadline for all career proposals, and that is the 4th Wednesday in July. And that is a hard deadline, so that's not something you could, ask a DLI-DEL program officer for an extension on, because this is an NSF-wide hard deadline. And note that it is earlier than our, than our September target date for regular senior awards. So for more information on this career program, I've given the website there for the NSF career program. There are special eligibility requirements for the career program. So the PI has to be untenured, but hold a tenure track or equivalent position. And if you go to that website, you can see the details of exactly what they mean by equivalent position and some other nuances of the eligibility requirements. Another thing to point out about the career awards is that career proposals to DLI-DEL have to satisfy all the requirements of not only the NSF PAPPG, but also the career solicitation. So there's special requirements for that, and also the DLI-DEL solicitation. So you have to be managing all of those requirements when you're preparing your proposal. The next thing I want to highlight is the DLI, Doctoral Dissertation Research Improvement, or DDRI grants. So these are for 1 to 2 years for up to $15,000 in direct costs. For these, we are currently accepting proposals at any time. In the future, we may be adding target dates that will match the target dates for the senior awards, the September 15th and February 15th. But for right now, we are accepting these proposals at any time. So on a DDRI grant, the principal investigator is the dissertation advisor, and then the co-PI would be the doctoral student. One difference between the DDRI and the senior proposals is that for a DDRI, the project description is only 10 pages as opposed to 15 for the senior proposals. This is something we hope maybe you keep in mind if we ask you to review a DDRI proposal, because they are a little bit shorter and easier to read for that reason. And so for more details about the DLI-DDRI grants, I've given the link here to the webpage for this program. And then the final type of DLI-DEL grants that I wanted to mention are conference and workshop proposals. So these should be for a new one-off conference or a special version of or an add-on to a recurring conference. So what we don't want is to just fund kind of a standard instantiation of a recurring meeting. We want there to be something unique and special about this meeting that we're going to fund that NSF funding will make possible. So you want to think about it that way. There are 2 annual target dates for the proposals, September 15th, February 15th. But you can submit a small conference proposal if it's under $50,000, including direct costs. So that would be a pretty small budget. You can submit that and have it reviewed on a rolling basis. If you're, maybe that's becoming more possible with virtual conferences now being more common, that you could actually run a whole conference or workshop for under $50,000, including the indirect costs. If you're gonna do that, if you're gonna, think about submitting a conference proposal off cycle, like a small one like this, please do get in touch with us and let us know that you're intending to do that. We wanna, because there's kind of these 2 times per year that we're anticipating receiving proposals. And if we receive one off cycle, we just wanna make sure that we're on the lookout for that and that we've talked to you about it. The project description for a conference proposal is 15 pages. And just like for any proposal, you'll want to consult the PAPPG, but the PAPPG has some very specific guidelines for preparing conference proposals, including a list of things that can or cannot be budgeted. So for example, there are some, restrictions around things like refreshments at your conference. And also there are rules about things like childcare considerations. So you just want to make sure you're following all the PAPPG guidelines that are specific to the conference proposals. So this link that I gave is to a specific section of the PAPPG that addresses conference proposals. One thing I did want to say about conference proposals is that we would really love to see more of these for DLI-DEL. This, I think, is something that we think about as a thing that NSF can do that can be really transformative, that can really benefit the research community. These are, conference proposals can, these conferences can bring together people who wouldn't necessarily have a chance to talk to each other otherwise at kind of standard meetings. So we really like to see these conference and workshop proposals, and we'd again like to see some more of these. And I think there are some kind of pressing topics that that are facing the DLI-DEL community that could really benefit from some conferences and workshops. So for example, we'd love to see a proposal kind of bringing together people who do more community-focused documentation work with people who are doing more computational work, and kind of bringing together those two different types of projects and kind of bridging those groups of researchers. We would also be interested in seeing something about, data sovereignty and its relationship to archiving and data sharing. So those are a couple of topics that, that have been on my mind. But I think, if you have any kind of idea for a conference or workshop proposal, I'd be very receptive to that. And so please do get in touch with us if you have any ideas along those lines. Here's just some contact information about these DLI-DEL research grants. So these are also present elsewhere in the slides, but so for the DLI-DEL research grants, if you have questions about things like your proposal submission or preparing the proposal, those would best be directed to the NSF program officers. If you already have a DLI-DEL award and it happens to be one of the ones that was funded through NEH, then Jacqueline would be the person you would want to start with. But we're all, always willing to help you and get you to the right person if you just reach out to one of us. And then before I stop and let us take questions, I did want to just mention a few more things at NSF, additional and related resources that aren't part of the DLI-DEL program per se. So the first one is the NSF Linguistics program, and I've given the link there to that website. Tyler and I are also the two program directors for the linguistics program. So when you have questions for linguistics or DLI-DEL, you can ask me or Tyler. And so if you have a project that's, not about an endangered language, you may, want to end up targeting linguistics, or if your project is more focused on something about linguistic theory and less about language documentation or infrastructure building, then linguistics might be a better fit for your proposal. We do also do a fair amount of co-reviewing, so both programs could end up, both linguistics and DLI-DEL could end up reviewing your proposal, or you can actually request that both programs review your proposal if you think that is appropriate. And you can also consult us about that, the question of which programs a better fit, or whether your proposal is within the scope of one of the two programs. Another program that might be relevant to some of you is the NSF Cultural Anthropology program. So I've given the website there. And the final thing I wanted to mention here is the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Program. So this is actually kind of a special entity within NSF. It has its own website there that you can see on the slide. And the thing I wanted to point out here is that the DLI-DEL and linguistics program officers actually do not manage the GRFP proposals that are on these topics. We get a lot of questions about these right around the time of the GRFP deadline, and so wanted to let you know that we actually don't really participate much, if at all, in the running of that program. And so, so importantly, we actually don't get to select the reviewers for your proposals, which means that the advice we always give is that these GRFP proposals should really be written for a general social sciences audience, and you shouldn't assume when you're writing it that your audience is going to be linguists. And definitely not, you should definitely not assume that it will be linguists with expertise in your narrow subfield. Okay, so try to write for a more general audience when you're preparing those proposals. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop there, and let me stop sharing my screen. Okay, and then maybe I can bring back the other panelists, and we can take, I know there have already been some questions answered in the chat. So we can take your questions. And so, yeah, so thanks very much for your time. And just, you can type your questions. Yeah, we've been tracking if there are some that are already asked that haven't been answered, or.
I think we've answered the ones that have been in the chat already. I believe there's a way for you to speak if you're attending this. So if it's easier for you to, or you want to ask a question verbally, I believe we can figure out how to do that technically, or Mark here can surely help facilitate that. But otherwise, yeah, please put questions in the box.
I think you would need to raise your hand, and then we can make your microphone active.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, so there's a question about whether conferences proposed need to occur in the US. Let's see, Tyler, do you know?
Yeah, do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
They don't need to be in the US, but I think the best way to put it is that NSF and NEH money are US taxpayer money. And so, international activities, or, in particular, a conference outside the US creates extra challenges for us to justify. So we can do it, but it's certainly easier for us to fund a workshop in the US. And generally, we need to be able to support, to sort of justify awards like that in terms of the benefits to, at least at some level, US-based researchers. So we really are just not able to, because of the restrictions on our federal funds, to say, fund a workshop where all the attendees are going to be international scientists and the money is all going to support the participation of international scientists. So certainly NSF wants to support international collaborations, but we need to be able to justify, activities in terms of sort of how it benefits US taxpayers at some level. I hope that sort of adequately addresses that question. It is a great question, and we can certainly talk about specifics. Again, we can sort of generally fund lots of different kinds of workshop activities. We just need to be able to justify them in terms of, the mission of NSF and the sort of limitations on US federal funds.
Just one quick thing to add there is that, the proposal will be coming from a US institution. And so, typically the institution that's proposing the conference will be hosting it. And so, this doesn't come up very often, but there are cases where, we would fund a conference proposal that does end up being actually located somewhere outside the US, but the recipient will always be a US institution.
Yeah, I'll just add, and this is sort of to just keep talking about this while other, people think of other questions or other questions come in. But we're particularly able to and interested in supporting US-based students. So oftentimes, international workshops that are already happening or that are being organized, it's much easier and sort of better for us if we can support, the participation of students from the US who might not be able to attend and those kinds of things. So I guess a part of that is to say that we can be somewhat creative in how conference proposals look and get funded, as long as we can justify them. But we are able to sort of have some creativity about supporting international conferences where the piece that maybe NSF is paying for is the participation of US students to go to an international event and gain, benefits from that.
So there's a bunch of other questions in the chat, but I see another one that relates to conference grants. So maybe I could just answer that one real quick and then we can move on. There's a question, does the conference grant need to be written by faculty and who is eligible? So who's eligible is actually the institution. So it was that list of the 3 types of institutions that I mentioned, the US higher education institutions, nonprofits, and other types of organizations, and also tribes and tribal nonprofits. So it would be those 3 types of organizations that are eligible. And then the organization actually determines within internally who is eligible to be a PI on a proposal that comes from that institution. So at a university, it's typically faculty, but that's all within the purview of that institution to decide who is allowed to be the PI on a grant that's being proposed by that institution. Okay. Do you want to just go through the rest of these in order? Here's one about, so specific tips about languages spoken in Brazil. So I don't know, Michael, if you want to get called on to elaborate on that question at all, or? Yeah,
I think I would need more elaboration. I'll just go back to something that Suha started the presentation with. DEL focuses, I guess I should put it, a part of what goes into the funding decisions and reviewers' considerations is the urgency of the situation for a particular community of speakers. And so there are different measures of endangerment, and there's different notions of endangerment, and this is Suha pointed to sort of different sources on that. So I think this is sort of indirectly getting at a question about Brazil, but ultimately, a proposal has to make the case for why that particular language is, of sort of relevance to the program, is of relevance to the research community, and why it's urgent. And the better a case a proposal can make for the urgency of the research, frankly, the better it'll probably do, as long as reviewers see that urgency and agree with the cases being made. So I think it's hard for me to give specific advice about specific languages other than to say, we can support research on languages anywhere in the world, and a big part of the scientific sort of evaluation of the proposal will be the case that the proposal makes for, for the urgency and the value of doing that particular work.
Great. So I'm not able to unmute Michael. I see he's added some clarification. He's interested in how the program thinks about the Brazilian funding agencies. So I don't know, Mark, if you're able to unmute a participant. I don't seem to have that capacity in my control panel. Maybe while we're working on that, we can go to the next question, and then we can come back if we're able to get Michael unmuted. There's a question about the fellowships. Maybe Suha, would you like to talk about that?
Actually, it looks like Suha responded as in the chat.
Oh, you did. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, great. Let's see. So Jeff Heath has a question about experience with multi-language as opposed to single language projects. Yeah, thanks for that question. So that I think that's at your discretion, and it kind of depends on how you think it's going to come together as a coherent project. If you think that there is a justification for including multiple languages, then I think you should do that. And if you'd rather focus on one language, I don't necessarily think that working on multiple ones gives you any kind of advantage necessarily. One thing I would say is that, because DLI-DEL is so invested in broader impacts and making sure that there is a contribution to the community and that there's community buy-in, to the project. What you don't want to do is spread yourself too thin and have, so many different languages you're working on that it becomes impossible to really have a robust engagement and kind of meaningful involvement of community members from the different language communities. So I would say that would kind of put an upper limit on how many languages you'd want to involve in the project once it starts to feel like, you're not really able to respond to the needs and interests of an individual community because your project has so many different communities involved. Aside from that, I wouldn't discourage multi-language projects. I think if you look at our history, we've funded a number of those, and so those are welcome. So, like I said, I guess it's kind of at your discretion with the caveat that you don't want to compromise your ability to respond to community interest and needs. Tyler, do you want to add to that?
That's a great answer, and I think a more general sort of version of that is I think the challenge in writing any grant proposal is getting the right amount of sort of meat in the proposal. So what can you kind of articulate both in the the limits of the application size and the limits of something that would be a 2 or 3 year project that reviewers are going to sort of interpret that they have enough information to evaluate its likelihood of success and so on. So that's sort of a more general response. And thanks for joining us from Burkina.
Yeah. Mark, are you here, and are you able to help us with unmuting a participant?
Yes.
So it's Michael Becker.
Okay.
If you're ready, Michael, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, all right. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thank you for organizing this. This is great. So I guess what I remember, I talked to somebody who was at the NSF several years ago, and I think at the time the Brazilian economy was doing pretty good, and they told me, well, we might want to think, does this need to come from U.S. taxpayer money, or is this something that should be funded by the Brazilian government? And so I don't know if that kind of thinking still exists. And maybe are you following like the fact that the Brazilian economy is, not doing as well, and the the funding opportunities in Brazil are quite a bit more limited than they used to be. Anyway, so yeah, that's kind of where my question is coming from.
Thanks. Do you want to start on that, Tyler? Or?
Sure, and thanks for filling that in. You know, I would say that there's nothing specific about Brazil or any particular country from our perspective. I think one of the things that we have to take into account is that there's always more demands on NSF funds than, you know, like solid proposals then can be supported. And so often if it does seem that a proposal sort of could have gone somewhere else for funding or should have gone somewhere else for funding, that might have played a, you know, from what you're sort of telling us about, maybe that was a factor in the particulars of that proposal. So maybe it was something that at the time there was Brazilian funds to cover. This sort of also interrelates with the question we had before about international conferences. So, you know, we can support international fieldwork, we can support, you know, funds that go towards research assistance outside of the US and so forth. But the more a project and its costs become about, you know, those sort of international costs, the harder it becomes for us to justify. And obviously that, you know, impacts supporting work on endangered languages around the world. So again, we can typically support, you know, the competitive proposals that come to us, but there are times where, you know, if enough of the project is really about the benefits to a particular, you know, nation's peoples, we might be in less good a position to make a case that that's a priority for our funding when there's other, you know, sort of equal priorities. So the only other thing I would say is that we also, NSF is limited in terms of kind of cost sharing kinds of things, and that can be a sort of technical federal budgetary kind of definition. But again, if it sounds like something could be funded or is being partly funded by some other, you know, agency, that can make things a little more complicated for us. So hopefully that helps. But what I would say, Michael, is that, you know, generally, if you have a proposal and it's about, you know, doing work that's within the scope of DEL and, you know, the costs are sort of appropriate to the project and so forth, you should certainly, you know, either talk to the active program officers or, you know, submit a proposal. It is the case, though, I'll just, one last comment on that, is that our things do change at NSF over time in terms of funding priorities and our sort of capabilities. And so it's possible that there's something that at the moment when you asked that previously, you know, that was sort of on people's radar at NSF, but I don't think there's anything right now that's on our radar. Mary, do you want to add anything, or did I?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Thank you. Does that answer your question, Michael?
Yeah, thank you so much. That was great. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks so much. Here's a question about the linguistics, so the specifics about the linguistics grants, since we only really talked about the DLI-DEL, so kind of the award limits, length of support, et cetera. So for the linguistics senior awards, those are also 1 to 3 years. We don't have an actual solicitation for linguistics. We have a web page, but we don't have that formal document like you would see for the DLI-DEL. And so it doesn't have the hard limit on like the maximum for an award, the 450,000. Typically, the maximum for linguistics senior awards is also 450,000, but it's just not, you know, written in stone because it's not part of a solicitation. But you can think of it as kind of comparable. And then regarding the linguistics DDRI, because linguistics also has the dissertation improvement grants, so that's pretty similar to what we said about DLI-DEL, but the amount is actually a little bit lower, I believe. The maximum amount for a DDRI, it's 12,000, not including indirect costs. So, and I think the rationale for that is that, you know, the DLI-DEL DDRIs tend to involve field work more frequently than the linguistics ones would. Linguistics also has different target dates than DLI-DEL. So linguistics target dates are July 15th and January 15th. So they're a little earlier than the DLI-DEL. Did I miss any differences, Tyler, that we ought to mention?
No, I think that's it. And similarly, there's, you know, we accept conference workshop proposals, we accept career proposals at, you know, as do other programs at NSF. So that's right. And as Mary said, it's sort of most of the similar kinds of you limits apply. So it's actually not, you can put a proposal in that asks for more than 3 years of funding, but doing that is just very sort of marked at NSF. And because of some limitations on the length that federal funds can exist for, it's, we tend to just prefer making grants for longer than that period and so on. But yeah, generally the sort of guidelines for DEL apply to the linguistics as well. I saw there's a follow-up question about junior faculty. And this is sort of similar to a question we answered before, which is that ultimately your institution, for any NSF grant that these programs make, the institution is the grantee, and so the institution is, picks who is eligible. So yes, junior faculty are generally, eligible at institutions, but ultimately, if you're an adjunct faculty member or a recent graduate student or something, you might need to, talk to your sponsored research office to find out if you're eligible. But junior faculty, I don't, I can't think of an institution where you wouldn't be. And in fact, NSF is very supportive of junior faculty. I mean, to put it sort of plainly, we'd love to see more grants go to more diverse, principal investigators, and junior faculty getting involved in federal funding is really great. So we encourage you to apply for grants from DLI-DEL or linguistics. As I think Mary pointed out before, linguistics and DLI-DEL can co-review, and really it's sort of about what are the principal goals of a project. So, some work might be relevant to both programs, some work might, involve an endangered language, but really be about testing some linguistic theory, and maybe that's more appropriate to go to the linguistics program, and so forth. I'll just add one other quick thing. We didn't talk about postdoc opportunities at NSF, but I do want to mention that SBE, the Social Behavioral Economic Sciences Directorate, which is the Directorate Linguistics and DLI-DEL, offers a postdoc fellowship program as well. And we, similar to the GRFP that Mary mentioned, we're not really involved in the review process or anything, and that's a general call for postdoc proposals from across the social and behavioral sciences, but linguists and endangered language researchers do get supported by those programs. And so we certainly encourage you to look for the SBE postdoc opportunities. And so that is one of the only exceptions to this place where we keep stressing that institutions are the awardees or the applicants to NSF. So for the postdoc applications, there are actually fellowships that NSF awards to individual postdoc scholars to go somewhere new after their PhD. So we've gotten a couple questions about eligibility, about the NEH fellowships and so forth. And Gladys, if you're still with us, I guess I'm thinking of your question. I didn't think before to mention this, but NSF does offer a small number of postdoc funding opportunities. While we're waiting, if there's other questions, we've been talking a lot about NSF stuff. Suha or Jacqueline, if you want to jump in with anything else, please. Don't mean to make it too NSF focused, our answers.
Well, I'm here to support NSF, so I think the way that you explained everything, Tyler and Mary, was really wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So we're happy to take more questions. If that's it for now. We're also, I think of the four of us are, very happy to answer questions outside of this setting. So you've got our contact information, or you can easily find it. So you're welcome to follow up, and we can, schedule individual chats, or we can respond to questions over email. So let's see, there is a question that just came in from Hilaria. So that is about the career grant. So it will be in the slides, which you can access. There's a PDF in the handouts, and I believe that we'll be making, LSA will be making this available online soon too. But Mary, you said it's the fourth Thursday?
Wednesday in July, I think.
This fourth Wednesday in July. And so that'll be on the career website. There's a lot of information about the careers. And if you are thinking about the career grants, just keep in mind that they do have special criteria, that they're about Those are 5-year projects, as Mary said, but they involve both research and educational components. And so there's quite a bit of stuff to sort of think about and combine in your application and your proposal. So you want to be sure you look at all the materials that the career program has online.
Well, if there are no other questions, we can wrap up unless there are any closing statements you'd like to make. Nope. All right. Well, I want to say to everyone, thank you for joining us for our webinar. Be sure to keep an eye on your inboxes. You should receive a follow-up email with information about the recordings of the event and other opportunities, including opportunities to join the LSA if you are not a current member, as a perk of having attended this webinar. So the technology is a little strange. Once we close this broadcast, it will kick everyone out. So I want to say goodbye and thank you to our presenters. We will all be suddenly disconnected from one another, but we're grateful for you coming, and we hope to see you again next time. So thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.